And the next keynote speaker is Anneli Veispak. And Anneli Veispak is currently a postdoctoral research fellow in the Faculty of Psychology and Educational Science, Parenting and Special Education Research Unit at the University of Leuven in Belgium. Anneli defended her doctoral dissertation at KU Leuven in 2012, having previously studied cognitive neuroscience at the University of Amsterdam and special education at the Tallinn University in Estonia. In her doctoral research, she's being inspired by the concepts, and something have happened with my papers. I can't continue, I'm sorry for that. But Anneli, she will talk about the world beneath the fingertips and the cognitive process that make it possible. Please, Anneli, the floor is yours.
Hi. What do I do with that? Should I just put it on here?
Or in your pocket?
In my pocket?
Yeah.
Right. So, hi. I feel a bit awkward with the thing around my head. Maybe my head is too small. It doesn't fit properly. It seemed to be fine on Barry, but it's not fine on me. So hello everyone. My name is Anneli Veispak. I'm doing research in KU Leuven, but also I've just picked up a new position at Tallinn University. So there's lots of mess and lots of things to do, and I'm constantly busy and I forget things all the time. So I apologize if I forget to talk about something that's written down on slides, so please kindly do remind me. And also because I was too enthusiastic about the presentation, so I made my slides very heavy with information. But when I practiced it this morning, it turned out that I'm definitely not going to be able to talk about everything, so I have to slip over things, and do forgive me for that as well. So I think, so how was it now? Okay. So I think I kind of need to explain the title of my talk a bit. And I want to explain it because it represents a very important discovery in my life, maybe the most important discovery of my life that I made at the tender age of 7. So I learned to read at the age of 6, but I didn't like it very much in the beginning. I didn't kind of get it. But I do have a very vivid recollection of the first book that entirely captivated me, and it was a book called The Land of a Green Sun. And I remember how I realized that there's an entirely different world hidden away in this book. And I wondered whether it's the same with other books. And I couldn't remember anybody telling me about that when they taught me to read. And I wondered why. Why was that? And then it hit me. It might have been because they didn't know. And then I wondered, should I tell them? And then eventually I didn't. And I didn't because I didn't have the words for it. And back then it wasn't very fashionable to listen to your kids attentively about what they've got to say about life. So nobody really knew how to listen, and I didn't know how to say. But the good thing about having chosen an academic path, I forgot to press the key. So that's the world in books hidden away. So the good thing about having chosen an academic path is that now I do have the words for it, and I can tell you that. And you're all here because you want to listen, I presume, and it would be impolite of you to leave the room, so I just used the quick chance to say it. So I think there's another world hidden away in books. So where was I? Okay. And this world is entirely exaggerated in every possible way, and it's limitless and priceless and open for everyone. But now, however, there are a few buts, and the but is that the visa to this world is only provided to those who take the trouble to go through the hassle of learning to know the graphemes. These are the letters and combinations of letters, and then learn how to hook them up with the sounds, with the corresponding sounds in the language in question. And then they need to go through the trouble of getting past the period of laborious decoding to automatize the skill in order to access comprehension fast enough to negotiate the limits of verbal short-term memory. Wow, I just redefined reading there. So seems so simple, but in fact it's a very complex process of complex processes, and we only have to think about it if the visa application has been denied. So now, coming back to the title, what has amazed me about Braille for a long time is that I think it's a perfect example of the flexibility of the nervous system, or human nervous system, which facilitates the access to this limitless world, which is just the world of pure abstraction, through a patch of skin on fingertip with a surface area of 0.25 square centimeters. And hence, I think there's some truth in the title, and the whole world, or in fact the doorway, or an access to this world, is hidden away beneath the fingertips of Braille readers. And I have kind of investigated this doorway, or access to this world, starting with my doctoral studies. So now, oh, that's the fingertip. I forgot that as well. So as I've been given the stage, I will talk about my two studies. So the first was my doctoral study, and I titled it Perceptual and Cognitive Underpinnings of Braille Reading. And then I will also very briefly talk about my second study, which is under review currently. And it's called Online Lexical Interpretation in Braille Reading. And I will try to make it, I will try to oversimplify and just make it kind of easy to listen. So now I move on to the participants of the first study. So when I was listening to Kay, then I thought there are certain things that you're not allowed to say because they're just too politically incorrect. But apparently, you can say them. At least Kay did. So, well, when I initiated my study, I had planned to do a massive research, just test hundreds and hundreds of Braille reading kids, and then when I started looking into the numbers, and I realized that the prevalence of childhood blindness without any accompanying multiple disabilities is 0.1 to 0.41 children per 1,000, I realized that I really have to replan this. So it didn't come out the way I planned. So eventually I managed to test 40 Braille readers. 12 of them were from Estonia and 28 from Dutch-speaking countries. So the Flemish part in Belgium and the Netherlands. But today I will only stick to the Dutch-speaking sample because it's just easier to explain one sample at a time. So they were normal Dutch speakers, they had normal intelligence and normal hearing, and then based on age, sex, language and educational level, we matched a group of print readers to the Braille readers so that we could compare their results. Oh yes, I forgot that one too. So, having started my doctoral studies in a research group who concentrated mainly on dyslexia and print reading, so I had to take a theoretical framework from this print reading research to build up my Braille reading research somehow, and we decided to go for the phonological and auditory temporal processing theories of reading. So these theories take certain assumptions about how learning to read and reading functions on the cognitive level, and based on those assumptions, we build up our own framework for the Braille research. And so these assumptions say that phonological awareness, which is a phonological processing, which is the human's ability to identify and detect specific sounds in our mother tongue, and the ability to manipulate with those sounds and retrieve them from your long-term memory and keep them in your short-term memory to just do different tasks with those sounds. Oh, yeah. I just keep forgetting pressing the button, sorry. So phonological awareness or phonological processing is very important for the ability to learning to read in alphabetic languages, because you need to be aware of the sounds in your language, and then certain letters are hooked up with those sounds, and then you learn to read by sounding out the words and retrieving the meaning. However, phonological processing, phonological awareness, before children start to learn how to read, phonological processing develops as a natural part of speech perception. So, and speech perception, in turn, depends on our brain's ability to detect specific cues in a speech stream. So speech sound is like any sound. It consists of frequencies and amplitude, and how our brain makes a difference between one phoneme and the other is by detecting the frequency and amplitude changes in a speech stream. So in order to understand what we hear, our speech perception ability relies on the auditory temporal processing ability. And in order to have good phonological representations or understanding of the sounds in our mother tongue, we rely on speech perception, and then reading in turn relies on phonological processing. It's just complex, but pretty much the sound system, the sound control system in your brain. So everything is related to how well we turn out to be reading. So therefore, we kind of had to make up an assessment battery how to assess all those different abilities. So we measured reading, how well and how accurately, how fast and how accurately Braille readers and print readers read short and long real words and then pseudo words. Pseudo words are words which have no meaning, which are just composed, made up, to make sure that nobody would have ever seen them before. So everybody has to read them by this fundamental decoding ability. And then they also read a story. So we measured the phonological processing ability by looking how well they can manipulate with the sounds in their mother tongue. So for example, they had to delete one phoneme of a word and say what it is, but it was like a mental exercise, or they had to do spoonerisms, where you have to swap the two first letters of two words and then say them the other way around. And we measured their verbal short-term memory and lexical retrieval ability as well. And then we measured their speech perception with speech in noise tasks. So speech in noise task is a sort of a task where words, monosyllables, are presented in a speech-shaped noise, and we measure the difference between, so the noise, the level of noise stays constant, and the words get quieter and quieter and quieter in this noise. And we measure the difference between the level of noise and the level of words, to see how loud do the words have to be presented in order to person to be able to hear about 50% of them correct. And then we measured auditory temporal processing. And we did that with a task where the person had to, so it was a forced choice paradigm, and they had to indicate which of the three sounds they heard consisted of modulation. So it might sound like wee wee, and then some of the sounds consisted this wee wee and some others didn't, so they had to point out the ones that did. And then those modulations in sound just went smaller and smaller, and when we detected the level from which onwards they couldn't understand anymore whether there was a modulation or not, and that we defined it as a threshold. And then, because they were Braille readers, then we also added a tactile spatial acuity measure. So we measured how sensitive their fingers were to see whether it relates to how accurately, how fast they're reading. So we used a grating orientation task for that. And in this task, we tried to determine the smallest possible distance on a sort of a stripy surface between two bars that the person could still detect. And it's amazing how small the distance is that Braille readers can actually detect, but I'll come back to that later. So the results. Okay, so I will explain that by those chunks of these different processing levels. So on the phonological processing and how it relates to reading. So in theory, what print readers usually show in their results is that phonological awareness is the ability to detect and identify sounds, relates very strongly to their reading accuracy, and specifically reading accuracy of those unfamiliar words, so that they can't rely on semantics, they can't rely on a meaning and predict what the word means, but they really have to do the decoding. And this retrieval measure correlates to reading speed, because basically how fast we're able to retrieve the meaning of those symbols from our long-term memory determines how fast readers we are. So at least for print readers it applies. So we looked at the correlations between those phonological processing measures and reading measures. There are lots of numbers, don't pay much attention to those, I will talk you through it. But basically what we found that in print readers, the correlation was exactly what it was supposed to be. It was just written off from a textbook. So all the correlations we were expecting were there. So print readers, apparently, because they weren't beginning print readers, but already fluent print readers, then they didn't show very strong correlations between phonological awareness and reading, nor verbal short-term memory and reading. But they did show a correlation between retrieving the lexical codes from the long-term memory, so it really strongly correlated to their reading speed. In Braille readers, on the other hand, even though Dutch is orthographically really transparent language, it means that the correspondence between the sounds and letters is very regular, so it's easy to learn. Even though the fact that it's orthographically transparent, in Braille readers, the correlation everywhere, just everything correlated with everything, which is a clear indication of the fact that Braille readers very heavily rely on those phonological processing measures in their reading ability. So now, okay. So this is a next slide where I will try to explain all the other relations between measures. So I have depicted a graph where I show the relationships between reading and phonological processing, speech perception, and then auditory temporal processing. And those relationships turned out to be different in print and Braille readers. And then the dotted lines indicate trends in data, whereas the solid lines indicate like stronger, really relevant correlations. So what we could see was that in print readers, again, all the relevant correlations were present. So they showed a very strong correlation between speech perception and phonological processing, which shows that people who are good at perceiving speech also have very good phonological kind of ability to manipulate around with the sounds in their mother tongue. However, the relation to reading itself wasn't that strong, as I discussed on the previous slide. So all the auditory, speech, and phonology seem to be very interrelated in print readers, but they don't have much of sort of a direct impact on reading itself. In Braille readers, on the other hand, the phonological processing, as discussed on the previous slide, was very strongly related to reading ability. But also what was a bit surprising was that auditory temporal processing, so the ability to detect the frequency modulations in a speech stream, related directly to reading. So even though theory says that it should go through speech perception and then speech perception influences phonology and only through there you can see the relation to reading, in Braille readers the relation was very direct. And it's been thought that the reason for that is that when blind children or visually impaired children learn to speak, when they learn the language, and since they're lacking the supporting information in form of mouth movements, then they learn to pay more kind of explicit attention to these acoustic cues in a speech stream, and therefore also their kind of representations of different sounds in their brain that are available for them to be retrieved in order to process anything. They might be just better specified, or they might have clearer categorical boundaries. There are lots of different reasons why that could be. And I'm not going to go into that because that would take too much time. So now we move on. So, and now I will, oh yes, tactile. I just do the pressing immediately and then I talk later, otherwise I forget. So what we found was that Braille readers significantly outperformed print readers. It's not very surprising. But what was surprising and interesting to see also was that since we measured their finger sensitivity of their reading index finger, but also middle finger, and many of the Braille readers we tested didn't really use the middle finger for reading, so it was just the index finger. So we measured both of their fingers. And in Braille readers, the difference between the sensitivity of index and middle finger was fairly large. So it was 0.3 millimeters, whereas in print readers, it was much, much smaller. So I think it's an indication of the fact that the Braille reading really stimulates the receptors in your skin. And so the information you get out of reading, so it's by scanning, is much denser and with better resolution, which is sent to your brain for further processing. And then another difference, which was quite interesting, was that young and adult Braille readers don't differ very much from each other, which is an indication that the necessary sensitivity to read Braille is reached fairly early on in the development. The tactile resolution measures showed a strong relation to word reading speed in the Dutch-speaking sample. So if the more sensitive fingers you had, the faster you were able to read words with meaning. But now I will here bring in a sort of short, small comparison to the Estonian sample as well, because I think it's just informative. So in the Estonian-speaking sample, the tactile resolution measure correlated with the accuracy of reading very short but unfamiliar words, and to reading speed when the words were longer but had a meaning. So I think it kind of indicates that, so when we read short words, then short words that don't have a meaning, then when the words are short enough, then it doesn't overload our verbal short-term memory. So the correlation between finger sensitivity and reading accuracy is evident. And when the words become longer and they don't have a meaning, then there are other processes that kind of override the sensitivity. Whereas if the words are really long and they do have a meaning and we can rely on the semantics, then sensitive fingers kind of aid the process down the line. I should really hurry up. So now the next step is to look at the reading measures themselves. Because in print reading research, it's been proposed that the way print readers read is they have, it's called a dual model. So they use a phonological reading route for reading for decoding basically. So if children start out learning to read, then in the beginning they just sound out the letters and blend those letters in their verbal short-term memory to retrieve the meaning of the word. So they process each letter separately in the beginning. But so if you read specific words repeatedly, then your brain kind of creates a shortcut from the way the word looks to what it means, and you don't have to go through each letters individually anymore. So that's called the orthographic reading route. So in order to be a good print reader, you consistently use both reading routes. So for some words which like complicated Polish names, Mieczysław, for example, you need the phonological reading route to decode, but then some very frequent words, we just see them and we immediately know what they mean, and our brain doesn't have to decode them letter by letter. So with Braille readers, because Braille is sequential and the fingers move serially over all the letters on a line, then we know that Braille readers can read through the phonological route like print readers can. But another question is, do they have another strategy for reading words like the orthographic reading route print readers? Because it's very clear that Braille readers also benefit from the semantic information, and they do read words faster than words with no meaning, for example. So what could it be? So one very obvious way to address that question is to look at the measures that we use to measure their reading abilities, so word reading and pseudo-word reading, and we used words with different length. And in print reading research, it's said, it's called a item length effect. So if we assume that brain uses kind of identifies words as whole units, then it shouldn't make a difference whether the word is short or long. It should take approximately the same amount of time. So short and long words are read with similar speed. However, if long words, if the brain treats, kind of processes each letter separately, then it should take far more time to read long words than short words. So the short words are read faster than long words. So in print readers, what you can see is that in real words, there's no difference between short and long words, whereas in those pseudo words, those made-up words, print readers spend much more time on reading long pseudo words than short pseudo words. And we wanted to see whether that applies to Braille readers as well. So now I have this messy graph. So I have depicted print readers and Braille readers, then their word and pseudo word reading ability. And what you can see here is that the most bottom line indicates that in print readers, indeed, there's no difference between whether the word is 1 syllable or 4 syllables. They read it with a similar amount of time. Whereas Braille readers still need more time to read long words than short words. And the same applies to pseudo words. So it seems like print readers indeed to have two different strategies for reading words dependent on whether they're familiar or not. Whereas Braille readers seem to use one strategy because the length effect applies both to real words and pseudo words. And then the next step we did was that we calculated one fluency score for all the reading tasks, words, pseudo words, and the story. So its fluency score is correctly read items per second. And then it gave us a ground to compare them all. And then we also compared young and adult Braille readers and young and adult print readers. And what we saw was that while print readers, young and adult print readers read words with similar accuracy and speed, then Braille readers are equally good, young and a bit older ones are equally good at reading pseudo words. So it indicates that they're really good at decoding already very early on. They're very good decoders, and there's no much improvement over the time. The improvement comes in from reading real words in the story. So it's another kind of developmental aspect that Braille readers get better at reading, but they seem to get better at reading through this mechanism which helps them to kind of cash in the semantic benefit. So how do they do it? So that brings me to the second study. Do I have more than 10 minutes left? Oh, that's good news. Okay. So that brings us to the second study. And in the second study, the main aim for the second study was to address the same question. So how do they do it? How do they cash in the semantic benefit? So it's very clear that Braille reading is serial. So you have to go through with all the letters on a line with a finger. You can't jump, as Barry said beforehand. But Braille readers, nonetheless, they do read real words much faster and more accurately than made-up words. So there's a guy that Barry also talked about. He's called Bertelsen, and his colleagues, they proposed that this lexical interpretation in Braille reading. So lexical interpretation is the search for a possible meaning. So if you read a word, then your brain starts immediately working in order to kind of identify what word it is that you read. So the process is called lexical interpretation. And that lexical interpretation in Braille reading might occur online in step with the reception of phonetic data relevant to each word, similar to the way we perceive speech, because speech is also serial. So we can't see the whole sentence that the person is about to say at once, but we have to hear it. So one word comes after another. And it's the mechanism that our brain uses in order to understand speech as well. And very often we say, oh, I knew you were about to say that. And the reason why we know sometimes before the person has finished what they say is because we have this prediction system which allows to predict certain identity or identify words before they are eventually said. So it's very common with your spouses, for example. So if you're married, then it kind of develops to an extreme sensitivity, usually. And the assumption, the Bertelsen derived this assumption from cohort model. So I will now explain what this cohort model means in terms of Braille reading. So according to this online lexical interpretation hypothesis, so what happens is that if Braille readers start reading or start scanning the word, then the initial letters they first read activate a set of possible lexical interpretations in your mental lexicon. So mental lexicon, it's just a phrase. It's not that we have a bookshelf in our brain or anything, but it's just a term to indicate a collection of knowledge that we have about words in our language, all the languages that we speak. So that's how the words look like, what they mean, what sort of letters are they composed of, and they all seem to be stored slightly different places, but eventually they all come up together to help us understand what we read. So anyway, so we read those few letters, and that it activates a possible set of different possible meanings, what word it could be in our mental lexicon. So consecutive letters that we read after that. So then our brain kind of starts this search, or it starts matching the string of letters that we've already read so far to the potential meanings, or what to the potential way. Sorry, how could I say it? So your brain starts the matching process, trying to find a best possible match from your internal lexicon, and therefore some of the words that were initially activated in your brain, they lose in their activity, or they just increase in their activity because they suit better with the oncoming lexical information, or they suit less. 10 minutes, oh God. So a match is found. Oh, okay. Now it made me nervous. So at a certain point, your brain recognizes what the word is, because all other alternatives are excluded. And the point where the word is recognized is called an orthographic uniqueness point. So if you read, and every word has one. So every word has a point from where onwards it cannot be any other word in this given language. And so we assume that in Braille reading, so if you reach this point of the orthographic uniqueness point, like the B in cranberry, for example, then the reading finger accelerates and you just go faster. Phew. So you reach the uniqueness point and then just go faster. So the earlier the uniqueness point in a word, the sooner the acceleration and the faster the word is read. What was here? Okay. So Bertelsen tried out this hypothesis on a group of Braille readers, and he discovered that indeed words with an early uniqueness point were identified much faster than the words with a late uniqueness point, irrespective of whether the words were read or heard. And also he found that the OUP effect, so the orthographic uniqueness point, it stands for OUP, so I'm now going to say OUP, otherwise it just takes far too much time. So the OUP effect was more pronounced for high frequency words compared to low frequency words. So words that we encounter very often, for those words it seems to work, and for those that we rarely hear, never heard, it doesn't function. But what he failed to do was that he failed to show the acceleration of the finger. So in order to demonstrate the acceleration of the finger, you have to be able to show with high precision how long the finger spent on each of the letters in a word. But they failed to do that because they used a tracking system which was fairly low, with a fairly low resolution, so it was 25 hertz. So they couldn't show the difference. So the question is, what should be done differently in order to detect the scanning beat difference at the character level, given that the difference is present? And we know the answer, so it's the tracking system. Barry spoke about his tracking system, which is fairly neat, but we have a neater one because because you can track two fingers at once, and we use a Braille display and we attach infrared LEDs on the fingers. So we sort of with a chewing gum, we put them with a peppermint chewing gum, we stick them on the nails, and then we hang the Wii remote control above the display to kind of track the position of the LEDs on the Braille display. And then we have an interface at the computer which kind of unites all the pieces together and makes sense of it later. So we have a log file that we could analyze. Okay, the stimuli. So we created two lists of sentences. One list of those sentences were coherent sentences, semantically coherent sentences. For example, the boy at least spoke about his problem. In Estonian, they sound far cooler than in English, so it's a poor translation. And then we had this other list of words, not words, but sentences, which were semantically incoherent. And an example I bring is like a vivid sleepyhead, particularly frosts idiotically. So it's orthographically and syntactically, grammatically correct, but it just doesn't mean anything. And then we also added a set of control sentences from a daily newspaper. And then some of those sentences were composed of words which were very high frequency and some of them fairly low frequency. And then we tested 17 Estonian-speaking Braille readers, but I can't talk about it much more. And then, so we analyzed the results in 3 levels, so on the sentence level, word level, and character level. And we observed how different characteristics of the stimuli, like the number of letters or word frequency or semantic coherence or where the word was located in the sentence, and the OUP effect, how they reflected on the data. And that's one thing that I really have to say about it. So in every analysis that we run, we use the personal characteristics of Braille readers, like how old they were when we tested them and how old they were when they learned to read Braille as a control kind of variables. And they really explained lots of unique variance, so between 30 and 9% of variance in reading time. So, okay, sentence level. Okay, so what we found on the sentence level was that with each additional letter, the reading time for the sentence increased, and sentences which were composed of very familiar words were read faster than sentences which were composed of very low-frequency words. But we couldn't find any sign of semantic coherence having an impact on the reading time. I wasn't happy with the results, so I kept digging. And then we ran another type of analysis where we compared different groups of sentences, and we found that semantics indeed still doesn't explain much variance. However, the semantics had a significant interaction with frequency, which meant that we could look at the sentences in different categories. So we took all the coherent sentences and compared the high frequency and low frequencies in that category. And what we found, that high frequency and low frequency sentences differed from each other only in the coherent context, but not in the incoherent context. Is it just 1 minute? No? Oh, 4, okay. So quickly to the next level. So analysis at the word level. So we run, again, a few rounds of regressions. But I didn't like it, so so I had to come up with a new way how to analyze the data. So eventually we ended up only including the words which were long enough so that the OUP location or the orthographic uniqueness point wouldn't overlap with the word ending, because very often the OUP is on the very last letter of the word. So we only selected the words where there were more letters after the OUP. And then we run a separate analysis for all the frequency groups. Yes, we did. So for high frequency and low frequency. Am I talking about the same thing here? No, I was too hasty, sorry. So what we found on the word level was that the number of letters in word frequency predicted the reading time very significantly, but slightly differently in the coherent and incoherent sentences. I will say something about that in the end if I have time. But one really important finding, in my opinion, was that in coherent sentences, not only the frequency of the word that you were reading had an impact on how fast it was read, but also the frequency of the previous word, the word that you read before the word in question. But in incoherent sentences, it had entirely different impact. So in incoherent sentences, it had a diminishing effect. So if you had a very high frequency word in an incoherent sentence and another word after that, then this high frequency word had a negative impact on the reading time. So you read the next word slower, which is bizarre. And then location in a sentence, a similar effect was observed, and the OUP location as well. And then we realized that what had happened was that our Braille readers got really lazy. So if they had to read those different sentences, and they had to make sense of it, so they had to say whether the sentence had a meaning or not. So, but if there was a sentence which was made up of very low frequency words they had perhaps never seen before, and so they just gave up. So they didn't really read anymore, but they just said, okay, it's very complex. No, it makes no sense. And they just slipped right through it. So I think it kind of bends our results a bit, but I think in coherent sentences, it's still very reliable. And then the analysis at the character level. Yes, this is what I wanted to show. So very briefly, because I only have 30 seconds to say it. So we managed to demonstrate the difference on the character level in the pre- and post-OUP regions. So the letters after the OUP were read much faster than the letters before the OUP in high frequency and medium frequency words, but not in low frequency words. So I kind of proved my point, so I'm very happy about it. And then the take-home message, if I just try to think about the fact that most of you, or majority of you at least, are teachers and have very direct contact to children who have to read to learn Braille, then so I think one thing that everybody kind of needs to keep in mind is that solid phonological processing skills are essential to Braille reading. And the good news about it is that phonological processing skills can be improved. They can be practiced through different word games or spelling out words upside down or the other way around. And you can do lots of fun things to strengthen children's phonological awareness skills. So even very small children enjoy that game very much, and you can be as creative as you possibly want to in doing this, and it's always useful. And so another point is that large active vocabulary facilitates Braille reading speed and comprehension. So if you have Braille reading students, then the best way to kind of help them read better is use lots of different words when you speak to them and make sure they understand what those words mean. So the bigger their vocabulary, the bigger is the choices they can select their possible lexical interpretations from, and the faster they read. And they also start teaching Braille as early as possible, because that was another very important thing that came out of my study, but I couldn't talk about it because I only had 45 minutes. So that's important. So the earlier you start, the faster reader you turn out to be. And the key ingredients in boosting Braille reading speed is frequent and consistent practicing. So in order to become better, do it every day, a lot, as much as possible. And nowadays, it's not very difficult because all this technology can be used not only for listening to books, but also for reading books and hanging out on Facebook and other different places where young people hang out. So I think if you're a creative teacher, you can find lots of ways how to integrate this knowledge into boosting Braille reading speed and accuracy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Anneli. It was very interesting, and also that you give a lot of good takeaways, because I was thinking when I'm listening to you and also to Dr. Hughes previously, that we have a basic research, we have the applied science, and we have the practitioner. And I think that we need to find the bridge between the three islands, so to say.
Yes.
So, but you started to discuss this, and I hope that you will share your experience during the conference, also in discussions with colleagues.
Yeah, but I'm very good at theory. I've never done anything practically, so if you...
But
so
maybe someone can teach you to do something.
Yes, that would be lovely. So,
Yeah.
Please.
Any questions? We have time for a couple of questions. Yes, please.
I like your writing very much, and I'm starting to be a little more persuaded that...
Microphone.
There was someone with his hand over here. Okay.
Oh, thank you.
Where was the hand? Okay.
Barry.
I missed you. Sorry.
I thought it was very interesting, and I'm starting to be more persuaded that reading Braille is a little bit more like listening, where you tolerate. You would understand the same sentence spoken by me, spoken by anybody else in this room, so long as it was in English, even though the precise sounds were quite different.
Yeah.
That's a remarkable capacity that we have. And I think Braille readers may well tolerate the kinds of things that I observed, the fluctuations in speed, for example, in similar kinds of ways. The brain is a fantastic instrument of adjustment to the environment. What I wanted to ask is, have you ever looked at sentences where the last word in the sentence is almost entirely predictable from the beginning of the sentence? So if the sentence read, the boy bounced the red, what's the next word?
I don't know.
No, you haven't got to it yet, but in your mind you may well predict that the next word probably is, to some degree, going to be something like ball, for example. So you got the prediction of words,
Yeah, I get
as
the
well as
point
the
here.
OUP. How might you distinguish people's anticipation or prediction of what the word might be versus the mechanistic uniqueness point difference?
I mean, in ideal circumstances, the OUP, the orthographic uniqueness point in each word, depends on the sentential context. So it depends on how predictable the word is, and also it depends on the language, because in Estonian, for example, we change the end of the word dependent on who's the doer, so and what is being done. So we change the verbs, and we change what's the other word in English? Sorry, so I don't have vocabulary for everything, but so we change. So all the words in a sentence change dependent on who's the doer and what is being done. So if you already start out with the fact that Yvonne, for example, is the doer, then we know that then we know how the verb. So we know that the next word will be verb, and we know in which form the verb will end. So the OUP will shift to sooner, because we can predict it, or the reader can predict it. But that's one problem in this research, is that we haven't managed to kind of create an algorithm or a way to predict systematically how those OUPs shift. So because it depends on a language. In every language it shifts slightly differently. And I'm very good at this theory, but I'm not very good at programming. So kind of writing scripts to kind of extract exactly the sort of data that I need. So anybody who's really good at that, please come search me. Let's go have coffee.
Thank you. One more question.
Yes.
Now we have two more questions, but short questions and short answers, please, because then we have a parade of all the exhibitors waiting.
Hello, my name is Vivian Aldridge from Switzerland. In your second slide, you were talking about getting past the period of laborious decoding to automatize the skill.
Yes.
And then in order to access comprehension fast enough to negotiate the limitations set by the verbal short-term memory.
Yes.
On a website, an official website of one of the German federal states, there's a statement that people who can't read more than, I think it was between 140 and 150 words per minute, will not be able to really comprehend a text, maybe because of short-term memory. That isn't explicitly stated. I see that a lot of Braille readers read far less quickly than that, but still understand the text very well. Mm-hmm. Do you have any ideas on that?
So, yeah. So I think because print reading and Braille reading are so, like, perceptually so different. So the pace at reading is not really comparable. As Barry said, there are very few Braille readers who can read with the same sort of speed that print readers do. But so I think that the reading pace of Braille readers is more comparable to the pace of speaking. So you can speak really quickly. I can't, but some people can.
Okay, I think we need to stop.
Quit.
Yes. So
let's have a coffee later.
Yes. So thank you. And one more short question.
I'll keep saying my name then. Is there any difference in age group when people start learning Braille? Have you seen any difference if it's children or adults who start learning Braille? In other words, is it too late to learn Braille, in your opinion?
I think it's never too late for Braille. But yeah, I think if you start learning at the age of, 50, then you're never going to be as fast as a kid who started learning at the age of 5. That's a fact.
Okay. So, thank you very much, and a small gift to you, and we will continue the discussion. Yes.